Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Thanks, Grisha. Thanks, Jeff, too, for being in touch, inviting me, and it's lovely to be back here. I've been coming here for a long time, and these last few years have distorted our sense of time so much that it's hard to know when we started. But I'm always grateful just to be invited to teach. It's really a gift, even though I've been doing it for a pretty long time now. It's sometimes surprising to me that what people want to hear me say something. And actually, this is a pretty busy week. I was just around the corner at San Francisco Dharma Collective on Thursday, and I'm doing a series over there on Buddhism and 12 steps of recovery, but Dharma and recovery. So if any of you are interested, got 2 more Thursdays there, 7 to 8:30 on Thursday nights, San Francisco Dharma Collective, 2929 24th Street. It's an easy address to remember. Today I want to talk a little bit about how I think of trying to live this practice and what it means to live a life informed by the Dharma. I remember a few years ago seeing an article about Roseanne Cash doing, she did a yearly benefit for the Tibet House in New York. And, but in the article, she said, but I'm not a Buddhist, I eat meat. And I thought, well, that's how you define a Buddhist, apparently. And I eat meat, so, and I do actually often say to people, I'd rather, I don't really call myself a Buddhist. You can call me a Buddhist if you want, but I don't call myself a Buddhist, really. I'd rather be an alcoholic than a Buddhist. It's simpler, Being a Buddhist is so complicated. When I started to practice, which was in 1980, I had these lofty ideas about what was going to happen to me if I meditated enough. And I really went for it that first year. I started taking I had been doing TM, but my girlfriend was into Buddhism. So, I decided I better be a Buddhist. And I took a course, this was in LA at the International Buddhist Meditation Center, took a class, and then I went on a 5-day retreat, then a 3-day retreat. This was in the fall of 1980. Then in the 3-day retreat was actually 81, President's Day weekend. Then I went on a 3-week retreat in the spring. And then I went on a 3-month retreat in the fall. And, what I thought, when I reflect back on what my impulse was that I wanted to become someone else. I thought if I meditated enough, I'd become this ideal Kevin that I imagined myself that I could be. And it wouldn't have all the depression and the obsessions and the fears and the drinking and the drugs and the sexual obsessions too, just to be frank about it. And but you know, there's this just agony in that, right? It's like you want to be somebody else and you're going to like meditate your way to doing it. I mean, obviously there's a lot of delusion in that. So after that 3-month retreat, when that had not happened, and I was really, I was crashing in my friend's apartment. It was back in Boston, Cambridge, and you know, I had to get a job. I didn't have a job. I didn't have any money. You know, my girlfriend had dumped me. You know, what was the point? You know, and over a 6-month period, I rebuilt my life. Got like, I didn't get a girlfriend back, but I got a job and I got in a band and an apartment. Everything was kind of stable. And then I met this homeless guru who said he was going to get me enlightened in 6 months if I just left everything, let it all go, and follow him and live on faith. So of course I did it. Because why wouldn't I? You know, that was who I was. 2 months later, I had lost the guru. Like he went one direction, whatever. I lost track of it. Because he would send me off. He'd say, okay, hitchhike across the country and I'll meet you in, you know, there in 3 days. And I did it, you know, but then one time we, you know, lost track, and since he was homeless, there was no phone number. And but of course, I mean, you know, I didn't have that much faith, you know. And so there I was in Venice Beach, homeless again, but really homeless this time, where I used up my friend's benevolence and then wound up sleeping in one friend's van for 6 months. And by then, all I wanted was to just have a normal life, you know. And it took me several years before I got back to enough normality that it actually made sense to get sober. So, you know, that's 1985. So that was a 5-year period from when I started to do Buddhism till I got sober. And when I got sober, it really became clear to me that, like, yeah, I'll just, if I could just like have a normal life, you know, which I had never wanted. Normality to me seemed like the most boring thing in the world, but I had discovered that, you know, boring could be good, you know. But, you know, all of that was, you know, around this idealized version of what spirituality meant, you know. It was tied up with these strange things like, you know, dressing a certain way so you looked spiritual, right? You know, and, you know, the beads and the scarves and the big flowing garments and you know, meditating in a certain posture, you know, really looking good when you were meditating. And then, you know, along the way, I kind of encountered people because I started to live this very normal life, you know, whatever that means. I mean, but along the way, you know, I've encountered a lot of people who have like ideas about what it means to be a Buddhist, like Roseanne Cash saying, oh, you don't eat meat. And it's true. For much of that time, I was a vegetarian, and eventually I stopped being a vegetarian. And then there's things like, well, yeah, you don't have a television if you're a Buddhist, you know, like you don't watch television. Or sports, like you would never watch sports, like football, it's so violent. I mean, you can't watch that. You know, and so it starts to get like, you know, and you read a lot of poetry. Definitely, a lot of poetry involved. Rumi, I mean, you know, if there isn't a Rumi poem, like what kind of a Dharma talk is it? You know, it's a failure. So, I mean, you can see that you know, that I've kind of come to this place where I'm like, I'm just not interested in any of that. You know, I just, it was painful trying to live up to all these models, you know, these images, and trying to be somebody I wasn't. You know, so then it's trying to figure out, well, what actually makes sense for me, and what can I feel comfortable about? Because, now it's like a public Buddhist, it's like, are there going to be projections, like when I started playing golf, because I played golf when I was a kid and I loved golf. And then when I became a musician and a hippie, it was like, well, first of all, I didn't belong to the country club anymore. Just to say that. But really in my mind, it was like, oh no, you can do that. It's like, that's for the Republicans, basically. But when I turned 60, I took James Barris's Awakening Joy course. And part of it was like, what do you really enjoy doing? And I was like, I really like playing golf. But I can't tell anybody. I can't tell any of the Buddhists because they're going to be like, you're out. Forget it. It's okay that you're an alcoholic, but no. We have to draw a line somewhere. But eventually, I came out around my golf and, and it's interesting, I go out and play golf and people are like, so are you retired? I'm like, no. What do you do? Well, I'm a meditation teacher. Oh, really? Oh, that's right. And then all of a sudden it turns out like golfers are really interested in meditation and half of them are alcoholics too. So, I wind up having a lot to talk about these guys and sometimes convert some of them. I met this one kid who's like an aspiring professional golfer. He was like, would you teach me mindfulness? I was like, yeah, sure. So that what I realized is that it's not about like you do some activity that doesn't look Buddhist. It's about making the activity Buddhist, because I realized that when I played golf, I really needed to be mindful, and that I actually didn't plan on talking about golf today, but I didn't have much of a plan. But I just figured I'd talk about what I said I was going to talk about, trying to live this practice. And then like noticing all the ways I get out of the present moment, like I'm projecting about what my score is going to be at the end of the round, or what I did on the last hole. And oh, wow, that's just like mindfulness. Oh, yeah. And then I would notice that when if I would hit a bad shot, the other people would be very kind to me about it. Oh, that's okay. No, wow, they're actually very compassionate. And then if you hit a good shot, they say, yeah, really nice shot. And that's called sympathetic joy in Buddhism. So I started to realize like, oh, the Dharma is here. Like the Dharma doesn't go away just because you go to a golf course or because, you turn on the TV or you're having sex or whatever, the Dharma is there all the time. It's a matter of me seeing it and being present for it. So I was thinking about, okay, as I drove over the bridge and was figuring out what I was going to talk about today. That's the Bay Bridge, in case you're wondering which bridge. I know there's a few around here. I thought, okay, I think there's three major components of how I think about my life as a Dharma practitioner. One is following the precepts, which is complicated and it's not just a simple, right or wrong, good or bad thing, but, not killing, not stealing, not harming sexually, not harming verbally, not lying, and not using intoxicants. And then there's just trying to be present, being mindful. And then there's viewing my experience through this lens of Dharma, which is kind of what I was talking about the golf course, seeing that the Dharma is everywhere and reminding myself of that. So so that's what I would call like the wisdom and compassion aspect. So the behavioral kind of stuff, the present moment awareness stuff, and then the wisdom, compassion stuff. And so that helps me because like, it helps me that helps me to have a framework. Because the most difficult part of this whole process is first, I think, remembering to do it, remembering to be mindful, right? Remembering that, when I'm projecting what my score is going to be on the next hole, to let go of that and come back to the present moment, and but the one thing about all three of these areas, following the precepts, being mindful, and wisdom and compassion, is that I fail at all of them. And so that has to be taken under consideration for this to work for me. Because my old model was there is no failing. If you're a Buddhist, this is what you are, you're perfect. And so you have to be, and which of course, because it's not workable, then, you wind up getting drunk because it's like, oh God, I can't do it. And then the next, well, I'm going to go on another retreat and, figure it out. And so for me, like this kind of overarching thing that makes this all work is self-compassion and forgiveness. That my shortcomings in all these areas are okay. And that comes back to a simple fact that I'm a human being. I'm not this perfected Buddha that I was imagining I was going to be. I'm not this ideal. There is no ideal Kevin out there, the platonic ideal of Kevin. And notice there was another Kevin here, so you know what I'm talking about. So this then, presents me with this framework, and then how do I work within that? So the precepts are a really good place to start. Like the first precept is to not kill. So I think, okay, I don't, go out to kill beings, but I eat meat. So I think, okay, that's, there's like an official Buddhist version of this, that it's okay. That is like, if the animal isn't killed for you personally, then you don't have the bad karma. That to me sounds like one of those little spiritual tricks, like so I just say that's my shortcoming. That's the best I can do, and just accept that I'm not perfect with the first precept. Then there's a second precept, not to steal. Okay. Generally, I'm, again, pretty good with this. But when I get to my taxes, I hope there aren't any IRS agents. There might be a little fudging. I'm like, okay, I'm not quite, okay, I think I'm pretty good with that. Generally, but there could be, some. Then we get to the sexual stuff. Well, I'm an old man, been married for a long time. It's what I've taken to calling my relationship with my wife late stage marriage. And I was talking about this with a woman who's a friend, who's a student, and she was describing her relationship with her husband, and he's a cranky old guy. I was like, yeah, I think it's like late stage marriage where you kind of recognize, well, this is what it is, when you get into a relationship when you're young, again, it's kind of like thinking you're going to become enlightened and be this perfect person. You think that the relationship's going to be this perfect thing. It's going to last forever and it's going to have all this magic in it. And eventually it's like, I have a companion, I have a partner, and it's great. When it comes to sex, well, I mean, TMI basically, I think is applicable here, but just to say that, it's not ideal. You know, dealing with, I mean, male sexuality, I'm gonna really get into shit here. You know, there's an energy to it that's intense. And it's something that's not, because men have fucked up the world with their sexual behavior for so long.
Amen.
There's not a lot of compassion for what we go through, but we live with a kind of energy that's really difficult to live with. And that there are times when I can understand why people become monks, you know, to like, just let me be celibate and like, just let me cut the whole thing off. Like, right. Like, I don't want to have to live with that energy. It doesn't work. You know, I had a monk contact me to talk about his sexual addiction. I was like, dude, like, help you, you know, if you're addicted to pornography, I just like, I'm sorry, maybe you should just leave the monastic robes. I don't know. So then, you know, here, and this relates to all the precepts generally, that I kind of go to the attitude. There's a term in the recovery world, harm reduction. And I think that's a really helpful one around sexuality, around food, around all of this. Like, I'm not perfect, but I'm not going out there binging around these energies, you know, not harming others or harming myself. But I'm not perfect, and I try to be kind to myself about my lack of perfection. Harm reduction is a good attitude, because and it's tricky because harm reduction can also be, you know, around alcohol and drugs can be an excuse. Like, oh, well, I cut back. Like, I mean, I only get drunk once a month kind of thing. Like, okay, do you drive when you get drunk, you know, once a month and kill people? Like, there's a lot of risks in getting drunk once a month. It doesn't sound like a lot, but you know, and I only shoot heroin occasionally. It's like, yeah, I don't. So it does sometimes get used as an excuse, but I think as a general principle, you know, if it's in a functional, healthy way, that it's a helpful way to think about our behavior, our around our spiritual life, like speech. I mean, what's right speech? I mean, there's an ideal for right speech, but you know, there's sometimes when I lose my temper, you know, or I, you know, act like an asshole or swear when I'm giving a Dharma talk. You know? It's probably not right speech. So that's the precepts. I think I better keep an eye on the time. Oh, we're doing fine. So then there's the practice of mindfulness. This is, you know, the heart of our practice, right? Without it, none of it really works, because mindfulness is what allows us to know what's going on. What am I experiencing? You know, what am I feeling? How am I behaving? What am I thinking? What am I saying? I mean, it's amazing that we can go through our lives and not know any of those things, not know what we're thinking, not even notice what we're saying or how people are responding to us, just so unconscious. You know? I mean, I don't know how many of you are MSNBC watchers, but Lawrence O'Donnell, is that his name? I watch him all the time. He did a thing on, you guys won't mind if I say something bad about Donald Trump, will you? He did a thing about how unaware he is about how he looks. And he just put like the image of him speaking, like right in the middle of saying something with the makeup. And Lawrence O'Donnell's like, dude, like, did not say dude, but that's how I enter. You know, like, you look ridiculous. Like, get a professional to do your makeup, because he does it himself, right? You know, he puts these, and he's like, you know, and your ears, you're not doing your ears. It's not working. But this is how we can be. I mean, this is an extreme example that I think can be helpful as an example of many extreme things about human beings. But this thing of like not realizing how you're being perceived, just being so, and we can all do that, right? We just. So mindfulness is so important with this. And then it's what allows us really to bore into the depth of this practice, which to me, kind of what grounds it all to me is mindfulness of feeling, how being able to be present with what I'm feeling. Because that, first of all, like feeling is what triggers all my unwholesome behavior and what triggers all my unwholesome thoughts. And so if I'm not aware of that, I'm getting triggered all the time. So if I can be mindful of feeling, it really protects me more than any other aspect of mindfulness. It keeps me from getting lost in my stuff. And there's this quote I wanted to read from Ajahn Jaya, what's his name? Jayasara. Very simple. I think I read this the other night too. Sometimes Buddhism is called a phenomenological practice. That means that in understanding the mind, we try to observe the mind, body, emotions, and moods as phenomena in nature rather than as personal problems. So I'd put it, mind, body, but to me, the moods and the emotions are the things that I see as personal problems. And if I can see them as phenomena in nature, just things that are happening. So bringing mindfulness to like, oh, there's this feeling. And I quickly name it and attach it to my history and my story. And, I'm frustrated with it or embarrassed about it or angry about it, sad about it, anxious about it. And it's like, whoa, just pull back, just see that it's a thing. It's a phenomenon showing up. And breathe with that. Always breathe with that. And then it's just an unpleasant moment that passes. That to me, that aspect of mindfulness, just being present for feeling. I mean, there's much more we can be present for, certainly present for the body and how we hold the body and how we move the body. Being present for thoughts and seeing what our biases are, what's showing up in our mind, the craziness, the beautifulness, the beauty. But the center of it for me is just feeling, being present for that. And then that view of experience as just phenomena in nature is the view of right view, which is the wisdom aspect I talked about. So mindfulness isn't enough because we need a way of understanding our experience. Mindfulness shows us very clearly what is happening, but how we understand that or interpret it is really important. And the Dharma gives us this lens, this understanding, oh, this is about how suffering arises. This is about cause and effect. This is about how greed, hatred, and delusion are operating in relation to your experience. And so we start to put these things together, the awareness of the experience, because again, like just feeling the feeling isn't enough, but when we feel the feeling through this lens of understanding that it's just phenomena arising in nature, okay, now I have a way of negotiating and working with that feeling that's different from, oh God, this feeling is really bad, I need to call my shrink and get a new prescription, which isn't always unwise either, but just and so this element, the wisdom, and to me the wisdom lens is the one that brings me back to the compassion and forgiveness for myself. Because if I'm really wise, I understand what's happening here in my feelings, in my mind, in my behavior is human. I'm being a human, and it's hard to be a human. So how do I want to treat someone who's having a hard time, who's experiencing a difficulty? I want to treat them with kindness and compassion. And because I understand that what happens to me, to humans, is that we are driven by these very powerful internal forces of greed, hatred, and delusion. I don't judge myself for the fact that those show up, and that sometimes I can't even restrain myself from acting on them. So I bring the forgiveness in. So this has nothing to do with not eating meat, or wearing the right clothes, or meditating a whole lot, or getting enlightened. It's just trying to negotiate, trying to find ways to negotiate what we've been given, which is this unmanageable experience of being a human being, and make the best of it, to not be miserable, I mean, it's not even important. It's not important to be normal. The only reason I decided I needed to be normal was because I spent most of my adult life between like 16 and 35 trying to be as abnormal as I could. And it was just, that was not a good path for me. But I find it comforting. I find this comforting because this is what, each day when I finish my meditation, I say, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And this is what I really mean, that I'm going to try to live by this framework. So I hope that's of some support for you. And I'll just see if there's any time and questions. Yes, we got about 10 minutes.
We have time, yeah.
Good.
What questions? Could you repeat that quote?
Yeah. And I will say this is from a book. It's called More Than Mindfulness. And it's a free book, which makes it actually harder to get. It's on the, probably if you Googled More Than Mindfulness, you would find it. It's on the Abhayagiri website, which is a Buddhist monastery. And you can download it for free, or you can, which I did here, but you can also get a copy if you write to them, and they'll send you a paperback. Where was I? I seem to have lost my place. Oh yeah, here we go. Whoop, whoop. Sometimes Buddhism is called a phenomenological practice. That means that in understanding the mind, we try to observe the mind, body, emotions, and moods as phenomena in nature rather than as personal problems. So to view our experience as phenomena in nature rather than as personal problems. And so this is obviously pointing to the not self concept, but taking it out of sort of theoretical and saying like, oh, if you just see your experience not as being about you, but just as things that are happening, then you're experiencing not self. You're experiencing things as not attached to a self.
So the thing that pops up for me with that is, in my little me mind, is, okay, is that the truth, or is that just a trick to try to get me around taking those things as real, or as issues that I need to deal with?
So think for me, this is best thought of in terms of two truths, the relative reality and the absolute reality. In absolute terms, there is no self. It's just phenomena in nature. In relative terms, all these are all real things that are happening, and I have to deal with them. And so it's both, you know, and it's the question is, what's the wise way to respond to them in the moment? And generally speaking, you have to address both realities. You don't have to, but I think the wisest thing is to address both realities, to hold them and be able to kind of breathe with them as just energies, but then to say, oh, do I need to address this, like this mood or this thought? Is there something I need to do in the real world? You know, am I clinically depressed, or, you know, is what I'm thinking about something? Maybe I should do, like, call somebody, or maybe I need to, you know, I'm going to write this down, or I'm going to, you know, apply. Like, I'm having a lot of feelings and thoughts about my job. I hate it and I'm miserable there. Okay, I can just notice that's phenomena happening as a feeling, but it doesn't mean I have to stay in the job. You know, I can also, like, look for a new job, you know, so it's both. They're two different aspects of reality that I have to deal with.
Thank you.
But generally, in human culture, it's just the personal one. It's the relative reality that people are absorbed in and don't see the absolute view. And so they get so caught up in that's what causes dukkha. That's what causes suffering, and what causes all the awfulness of the world is not having this broader perspective. So that's why we emphasize it so much in Buddhism, because it's kind of like you already have that other one kind of going on. But, you know, so we need to get a balance the other way.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, Jeff.
I just have this experience this morning about my impulsiveness in a way. There's been a mouse in my apartment,
Mm-hmm.
and my cat is quite the hunter. And she seemed to have cornered it behind the recycling bin, the garbage area. And so I pulled them out so she could get at it. And she did, and then the mouse was squeaking so loud. The precepts.
Yeah, I mean, my wife really hates ants. And generally insects. And so when they start to invade, she puts out all these things and starts killing. You know, again, I mean, you know, there's a world we're living in. Like, if we let insects and mice take over our homes, it's not going to be healthy. We're going to wind up getting sick, or it's, you know, it's just not workable. So
I think I'll get a live term.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when we first moved into our house, we foolishly tried to put down sod in the backyard, and the raccoons and skunks discovered it. So you would get up in the morning and the sod would all be rolled back, and they'd have eating all the grubs and things that were underneath. So we started having a guy come, you know, and with the raccoons, he said they would take them out into the countryside, but with the skunks, they had to kill them because they tended to be rabid, and so they had to, you know. So what are you going to do? You know. Yeah.
I just, speaking of rodents,
Oh boy.
and the Dharma in everyday life, that's something that I have occasionally a mouse problem in my kitchen. And so how do I resign myself to setting up traps? And I know this is a total cop out, but what I finally came up with is after I've caught the mouse, I open up the back door, and as I'm walking through the kitchen to the backyard, I say, "It's the circle of life." And I set the mouse down outside and it's gone, by the next day, so. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is that there are all these instances during the course of the day where you have choices
Yeah.
that you can make
Yeah.
and having a Dharma practice, it's like, well, how does this fit into the Dharma practice?
Yeah, and I think that's a great example, and I think that's actually a very wholesome response, because what the Buddha, there's a behavioral thing which is meaningful, but for sure, but what the Buddha really talks about is the mind. And so what I try to do in these circumstances literally is try not to hate the beings, even if you're killing them, not hating them with anger, like, but rather, oh, I'm sorry, this relationship isn't working. But, but it really, it's the mind, because that's what the Buddha, talks about. I've talked about this with monastics as well, where they're like, no, like, because we think that the most karma comes from our actions, but really, according to the Buddha, the most karma comes from our mental states. And so if we act out of compassion and kindness, I mean, it's a kind act to yourself as well as to the being, to like, no, this is not your home. Like, you can't be here. So yeah, I think to me, it's like watching, again, that's where I tune into my feeling. How am I feeling? Am I feeling this like disgust and rage, or can I just be like, this is no, just act out of compassion.